Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky meeting with Congress today, then heading over to the Pentagon, and then ultimately over to the White House. He wants more money for the war in Ukraine. Last night, Speaker Kevin McCarthy had this to say about Zelensky's visit.
Is Zelensky elected to Congress? Is he our president? I don't think I have to commit anything. I have questions for him. Where's the accountability on the money we already spent? What is the plan for victory? I think that's what the American public wants to know.
Where's the accountability? What is the plan for victory? I think that's what the American public wants to know. Well, that's for sure. Let's bring in Congressman Mike Waltz now. He represents Florida's 6th Congressional District. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Sir, nice to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thanks.
Take us behind the scenes today. What is it like with Vladimir Zelensky visiting? What kind of questions were put to him?
Well, I'll just say as a general matter, I don't think the timing is very good as we're debating as a Congress on how to get out of control spending under control. I just don't think it's great timing to be here saying, we need to spend more. One. Two, I have an op-ed out, Vince, that I'm someone that has said helping Ukraine defend itself and stop Putin cold is in our national interest. However, my op-ed says the era of blank checks is over. And for Joe Biden to continue to come to the Congress and say, don't bother to ask about a strategy, don't bother to ask how this wins, don't bother to bother me with explaining to the American people continually why this is in our interest. Just sign here and trust me. And if you don't support democracy and you don't care about freedom, frankly, is insulting.
Yes.
And then secondly, to go time and time again, for me to go to my constituents and say, dig deeper in your pockets when our border is out of control, when gas prices are out of control, when inflation is still ticking up, when he's not willing to go to Europeans and say, dig into your pockets deeper. And Germany just last week backed away from its 2% defense commitment. Enough is enough. If we can't get Europe to defend itself and step up to its 2% of its GDP commitment, which, by the way, only 9 of 31 countries have done, then when will they ever? So I just don't see how, without those, at a minimum, those conditions, that I can get to any more aid.
Just before Zelensky arrived in the United States, he apparently fired a number of defense officials who had been engaged in some level of corruption with the very U.S. resources that we keep sending over. Do we have our arms around how much corruption we're talking about? How much money has been wasted on things that didn't involve either Ukrainian national security interests or, for that matter, ours?
Yeah, so that's a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, apparently corruption's happening. I mean, it was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Just ask Hunter Biden, right? But on the other hand, it's good that they're taking action, good that they're firing. And I want to clarify one thing. Much of the aid, much of the dollar amount is military aid. We're not handing them, dollars or bags of cash. We're giving ammunition, tanks, parts, rifles. So it's X amount billions worth of our stuff. And if we're giving them the old stuff and then replacing it with new in our own stocks, I think that has been okay. What is so upset me with how Biden has screwed this up is, one, we should have armed them beforehand, not after. And then two, give them what they need to win, damn it.
Yep.
Instead, he has backed us into a stalemate and then again goes back to the American taxpayer time and time again. And then finally, H.W. Bush in the Gulf War, you might remember, went around the world and said, hey, this is all in our global interest to defend Kuwait against Saddam Hussein. How about you pay up Japan? How about you pay up South Korea? And you know what? They did. But instead, Joe Biden wants to use it as a political cudgel on Republicans.
Right.
And that is, that's just wrong on so many levels.
But Congressman Waltz, I do understand that a majority of the funding and equipment is going for military purposes, but we have provided somewhere in the vicinity of $20 billion to pay the salaries of first responders, government officials. We're paying pension obligations. We're operating hospitals. There's a lot of money that's actually flowing into a system that, as you mentioned, is notoriously corrupt.
No, you're right. And am I confident that the State Department and USAID has good oversight of that money? No. Number one. And number two, in the defense bill that we can't seem to get off the floor right now, which is incredibly frustrating, is an IG, an inspector general for Ukraine aid, a special inspector general that will be there on the ground,
like we had for Afghanistan.
Like we had for Afghanistan, and to this day is pointing out things that we absolutely could have done better, and where corruption existed. But again, I go back to just the basics of how do we not let this turn into Afghanistan? How do we prevent this from being an endless war? How long will it take? How much will it take?
Right.
What's the strategy? And oh, by the way, where's the burden sharing? I mean, it's just completely unfair for Germany, Italy, France, and all of those countries to keep having their social goodies and all their domestic programs while we're providing the vast majority of the military aid.
Do you know? Did Zelensky provide any answers about what victory looks like in Ukraine? It seems that in the military, members of the military, they always measure things based on the end state. What's the end state here? Has Zelensky given a clear answer on that subject, other than we want to take back literally everything, including Crimea, and that's going to happen at some unknown date?
Well, I wasn't in this meeting today to be completely clear, but in previous meetings, he has said it completely expelled from territory, and I've asked him, what does that mean? The 2014 line, the Donbass, all of Crimea, and it was frankly vague. I think the different question to ask is, what's in line with our interest, and what are we supporting to what end? Because as long as he has a blank check from Joe Biden, he's going to go as long as and as far as he possibly can. And that's where you've had President Trump say, "Look, you tell Putin, I'm gonna completely open up the spigots unless you go to the table, and then you tell Zelensky, right, we're gonna tighten it back unless you go to the table, and we need to." As the main funder of this effort, decide what success looks like. And Joe Biden needs to sell that to the American people, not use it as a political weapon.
Do you read anything into the way that Zelensky presents himself and his administration in public? There was a kind of a famous, now infamous, American citizen who's acting as a spokesman for the Ukrainians, a transgender guy who has been threatening to hunt down people who advance Russian propaganda around the world. I think the Zelensky administration may have distanced themselves from him a little bit in the past few days. But then also Zelensky went and spoke before the UN earlier this week and talked about how climate change is our #1 issue. This is Zelensky at the UN.
Even though humanity is failing on its climate policy objectives, this means that extreme weather will still impact the normal global life, and some evil state will also weaponize its outcomes.
So a guy who's trying to lead a country through a war, why would he be talking about something as stupid and decadent as that?
I don't know. All I can speculate is that he was pandering to many of these European nations who he needs help from. I don't know. On having that spokesman, woman, person, look, I mean, you got Biden's Secretary of the Navy putting a transgender sailor as their digital ambassador, yet the Navy can't give me any data on how many transgender people would join the military but don't feel comfortable doing so, and therefore they need a digital. I mean, it just is, yes. I don't know. It's just bizarre.
But it says something about the people who control the checkbooks, though, doesn't it? I mean, obviously, Zelensky's smart enough to know that he's projecting an image that will convince these people.
I think he knows his audience. He's pandering to the progressives in this administration and to out-of-control progressivism in Europe.
I know, obviously, the end of this conflict in Ukraine is a tough answer for anybody to get their arms around. Clearly, ending the bloodshed seems like priority one. Do you have an idea on how this should end, and how should the U.S. exert its influence here? Because we obviously, with all the weaponry involved, all of the money involved, we do have a controlling stake over how this goes.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, like I said, because Biden didn't do what he should have done up front, from dragging his feet on Patriots to tanks to planes to long-range munitions.
Yes.
I think he's backed everything into a stalemate and made it far more expensive, far more costly than he should have. So, I mean, my sense is this is in another month, the weather is going to turn and this is going to settle. about where it is, one, and then two, I mean, we have to be clear that to Putin, a pause, any type of ceasefire, any type of talks is just a pause. He is very clear on reconstituting the old Soviet Union. He sees it as existential to his rule, and I don't know that he, in the long run, is going to quit. So the question is, right, how do we stop the bloodshed? And then how do we prevent it from starting again?
I have two final questions for you, Congressman, and I really appreciate your time today. One of them involves the Iranians. The Biden administration just decided to send the news reports have said $6 billion. I think the number is actually closer to $20 billion ultimately of cash that they have access to now, thanks to the Biden administration. And they will quite obviously use that to pursue terrorism. They are providing drones to the Russians to help their war effort against the Ukrainians. Have you gotten any answers whatsoever on why the Biden administration seems to feel comfortable funding both sides of this war?
Well, look, I mean, I could tell you what they tell us, that they convince themselves that this money will be fenced off for humanitarian purposes. I push back and say, fine, you just freed up even if you buy that, you just freed up $6 billion that they can use for all their nefarious ends. And the message that they've sent to every terrorist group, the Russians, the North Koreans, and everyone else who hates us, is the price just went up on Americans. That's a pretty damn good payday. And so they released all of the Americans they were holding hostage in 2015 as part of the Iran deal, and they took this batch between 2015 and now, and they're going to start all over again. And so I will say, look, if you're Iranian American, if you're American anything, don't go to Iran. I do think we should have a travel ban there because they are using hostages as a payday and as leverage. And what is so upsetting to me is why wouldn't they? There's no downside with Joe Biden. There's only upside. You only stand to gain with him. There's no consequences. What has me very concerned, Vince, is that what's really going on is that this is greasing the skids to get to some kind of non-deal Iran deal, where, like once again, Biden's going to pour cash in there for some type of temporary one-sided suspension that the Iranians aren't going to abide by at all. And if you didn't see the Saudi interview, Mohammed bin Salman's interview on Fox, he finally came out and said what all of us watching the Middle East have long known, that if Iran gets a nuke, Saudi's going to get a nuke, other countries are going to get a nuke, and a nuclear arms race in the Middle East should scare every American. That's why it matters to every American in stopping them from getting one, and this appeasement strategy that Biden is on, this appeasement campaign from China to Iran to Russia is dangerous for every American.
Yeah, nuclear power kind of lets you do whatever you want. I mean, that's honest. I mean, people don't like admitting that, but Putin's getting away with a lot because of his nuclear arms. So not
to mention open and ongoing threats to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
Totally right. Last one for you. Going back to the Ukrainians now, there have been concerns throughout the war about American stockpiles of weaponry and whether or not we are hurting ourselves by sending them our weapons. That includes, for instance, howitzer shells. We've apparently reached dangerously low levels for things like that. Are you concerned about American weaponry being too drained by the war in Ukraine?
I am concerned. It's not a five-alarm bell because the main, there's different weapons for a land war in Europe than there is obviously for an ocean and air war in the Pacific. However, what it has exposed is that our industrial base is badly, woefully atrophied. We don't have the steel, we don't have the aluminum, we don't have the foundries and factories. If we needed a Reagan-style ship buildup tomorrow, we literally don't have the people that can turn wrenches, weld, electricians, much less the shipyards and the access to the raw materials. And that's why, amongst other things, what President Trump was doing to bring those supply chains home and revitalize manufacturing and blue-collar work here was so vital. Biden will tell you he's doing that, but then he puts it all in the hands of the unions. So that's where I have a much deeper concern.
All right. Congressman Mike Waltz, I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you very much, and very nice to talk to you today, sir.